Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Rice-Gauvreau. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Listeners, you're in for a treat. This lady is an emotional whirlwind of a dynamo.
Thank you, Simon.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking. I think we're going to be talking about growth here. We're going to be talking about resilience, and we're going to be talking about identity. I think that's kind of what we're going to explore today. And so I spoke to Michelle last week, and one of the things that she described, that she set off by describing about her journey and her particular journey, was her seeing the strength that she hadn't previously seen in herself. So this is an unrealized strength that has come to the fore on the back of some big stuff going on in your life, Michelle, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So can you give us a little bit of a flavor of that?
Sure. So I found out I was adopted when I was 15, and that really, I was being raised in an abusive home in Connecticut. Just give a little background. I am Native American, born in Canada. I was adopted in Canada as a newborn, brought to Connecticut, and my father, who adopted me, passed away before I turned 3. He left me with a woman who did not know what to do with me, so basically kept me hidden from the world and kept my adoption secret until I was 15. And growing up with my adoptive mother was short of a nightmare. She was a hoarder. She never kept up the house. We barely had any running water. There was no refrigerator, no stove. She had a hot plate to cook off of. And she never really worked. She relied on money from apartments that she owned and a few other side hustles that we call today. She used to sell at flea markets and whatnot. But there was abuse in the background. She just didn't know what to do with me, and she started asking relatives to take me in. So every so often I'd go live with a relative. The last relative I lived with ended up spilling the beans that I was adopted. And I write about this in my book called Who Am I? And that sent me into a tailspin because I was already having trouble as a teenage girl, sleeping at relatives' houses. And whenever I confronted my adoptive mother about this, she was very, very emotional. She told me she didn't want to tell me until I was 18. She would have never told me. That's something I totally believe. She never wanted to tell me. And I do believe that my aunt was basically kind of set up to tell me, I think. That's just my opinion. But anyway, after that, I was determined to go to Canada, find my birth family. Maybe they could rescue me. Oh, no. I went to the reservation, and it was a totally different culture and a totally different life on a reservation. So I spent the summer up there, had a beautiful time, met my brother. And then after that, it was time to come back to Connecticut. And the second I came back to Connecticut, my adoptive mother was like, I'm not responsible for you. You can go somewhere else. You're leaving this house now. Well, there go the rest of my teenage years. I spent time in foster homes and group homes. All the while, growing up as a teenager was just so traumatic, you know? And that really, all that, the trauma that I endured from all of that growing up and into the foster homes, I think kind of did a number on me because I just didn't know which way to go. And in my 20s, I met my husband. I was married. We had a child. I did all the things that a woman or that, couples do. And then it finally started hitting me. I was going in and out of the fog, still in touch with my birth family. But I needed more. I needed to come to terms with my adoption.
Yeah.
Let's fast forward to 2008, 2009. all of a sudden I needed a passport. I had a falsified birth certificate from Canada. I had to have Canada rectify that, but that everything took almost 2 years for me to finally say, am I Mohawk? Am I white? Am I American? Am I Canadian? It was identity. It was like, come on, people. But I proved myself. I proved myself beyond a shadow of a doubt. So I finally was able to get a Canadian passport. I had to get a green card here in the United States. I'm appalled that I even had to get a green card because I'd been here since I was a newborn. But my father thought he was doing the right thing by, falsifying birth records and whatnot. There's another crazy story. But so late in my 30s, I just started saying, I need to find some forgiveness. I need to find some healing here. So I started seeing different therapists. And I didn't want medication. I wanted something natural. So I learned how to do conscious breathing. And I do that every morning and every night now. I consciously breathe. And I also do imagery work too, whereas I can find an animal and like a bear and just kind of breathe into that and wonder what kind of message they have for me in my mind. So that helps quite a bit. And also learning to, be kind to everybody, because that comes back to you. You put the kindness out there, it comes back to you. And I've always done that. I've always been a good, nice person like that, helping others. And I think that kindness coming back to me now is amazing. It really is, because I feel that. I feel the energy, and that energy I can put back out there at any given time. And it just spreads all over, whether I'm in public or private or at work. So right now at the age of 54, life is okay. And I've come to terms with my adoption in a great way. Again, I still sometimes teeter-totter there, but it's mostly on the good side. It really is.
Good. Brilliant. So I want to take you back a bit to, you used the word tailspin, and you were in a tailspin, and I think this was when you were 15. So as yes. You say, it's 15. It's a tricky, teenage years are tricky for all of us, when adopted or non-adopted, and then you right. Add the extra this shock of being a. I mean, people use this term, don't they? Late discovery adoptee, and 15 is pretty late. I've heard earlier, kids at 10, people older than, like in their 20s, like there's no real pattern to it.
Mm-hmm.
But
no.
So you were, you said you were in a tailspin. Do you remember a moment or moments when you kind of started to arc out of the tailspin? So some people, people say we have to kind of like break down to break through. Is that like people use this thing? Do you remember a point where you started to?
Sorry. I do.
Yeah,
that's okay. I do remember when I kind of had a breakdown when I was 16 or 17, after I had met my birth family, and I was in the group home, and I was going through some intensive therapy at that point. After what my adoptive mother had done to me, and just, I mean, don't get me wrong, I had the option. I could have moved back to the reservation, but I chose not to, because I didn't know if I could take that lifestyle there. It was such a culture shock to me. And I had already been being raised in Connecticut. So in a group home, after going through some intensive therapy, and things started finally hitting me, things started just coming out of me. After I had that initial, I guess we could call it a breakdown, I finally started feeling better about myself. But again, I would go back into the fog for a few years after that too, and then come out of it. I've always dealt with depression, always dealt with it, still deal with it today, but in much better ways. That was pivotal to me, that breakdown, because it started to get me on a good path of being who I am today. And that has been 37 years, 38 years now that I have been, keeping my strength up, keeping my my emotional health in check, although there are times where, you know, it doesn't stay in check all the time. You know, I think I'm always going to deal with it on a day-to-day basis, but there are days I don't even think about it.
Yeah.
I hope that answered that question.
Yeah,
It's,
it did.
you know, it kind of, I still sometimes swirl in my head that, you know, wow, I was adopted. Wow, these were the circumstances. And well, okay, then let me just breathe again. Okay, we're good.
We're good. So the identity piece. So you think you're a white New Englander, right?
Right. I mean, I always grew up with the fact, knowing that I was half Native American, because my father, who adopted me, came from the same reservation, but lived in Connecticut, doing Mohawk iron work. He actually helped build the World Trade Center back in the 60s and 70s. Quite the story there. But so I always knew I was half, and I always knew I was half white. I just didn't know about the actual parentage until later on. And then, of course, the whole identity thing came up when the passport, and I call this the passport debacle chapter in my book, Who Am I? And it was like, I had applied for a US passport. I sent in my birth certificate that says I was born in Connecticut, from Canada. The birth certificate was from Canada. And that raised a bunch of red flags. I got a call and they said, this is a fraudulent birth certificate. Oh my goodness. No, it's not. And here's my story. Well, we can't help you. You're going to have to get a green card. It was just crazy. So I ended up having to go for 2 years, going back and forth between the two countries, saying, look, I'm here. This is what happened. Please, somebody help me out. Finally, Canada finally got it right, got the records right. And they rectified and amended my birth certificate to say I was born in Canada.
Yeah.
And they had to leave my adoptive parents on the birth certificate, because I knew my biological father would never have signed off on it. My birth mother would have, but my biological father would have just denied anything, you know. So I just left my adoptive parents on there.
Yeah. So how did that feel when you got that passport in your hand?
Oh, I opened a bottle of champagne. It was the second I got my birth records rectified, I sent them to the passport agency in Canada. They sent me a passport immediately. And let me just back up there. When I applied for the Canadian passport, I got a call from this man named Otto, and he says, we don't even know who you are. We don't even know if you were born in Canada. And I told him the situation, and he said, I'm going to call you back tomorrow. And he calls me back and he says, Michelle, I was talking to the director of our passport agency, and she said that if you send all of your birth records, or get all of the birth records, and send them a letter to what's called État civil, which is vital records in Canada, they may or may not rectify your birth certificate. They're known not to do much of anything for somebody in my situation. I said, you know what, I'll do anything right now. And the only reason I wanted a passport, because I was traveling back and forth so much to Canada. So I wrote the letter to État civil, and they called me up within 2 weeks and they said, this is approved. We're going to give you your new birth certificate. So I got that. I was so thrilled when I got that birth certificate, and then I sent it right off to the passport agency. Wow. I got my passport. Now I needed a green card here in America. And that took almost a year and a half to get, because they were interrogating me left and right. And then they wanted other forms of birth certificates of my grandparents and whatnot. Again, I explain a lot of this in my book. And I finally went down to Homeland Security in Connecticut and said, look, here's the story. I can't spend all of this extra money to get extra birth certificates that won't give you any more information than I've already given you and have proven who I am. The girl said, why don't you wait here? She said, I'm going to go talk to my supervisor. Okay. So I wait. I probably organized my binder at least 3 times, waiting for her to come back. And she comes back. She says, Michelle, and I go up to the desk. She says, "You should have your green card in 2 weeks." And I was like, wow. So within 2 weeks, I certainly had a green card. So after I had the passport, the green card, it was time to celebrate because I was part of two countries, Canada and America.
Yeah.
It was finally, I proved who I was. I had my identity. Granted, it was my adoptive identity, but I'm still Native American. I still belong to the reservation, and I'm here in the U.S. with my family.
Yeah.
So that was a story.
Yeah.
That was a story, and that really, those 2 years actually put me back into a depression. You know, going back to that, yes, it put me into a depression because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if they were going to deport me. You know, although I don't know if they realized that, you know, if we can get an Indian card, we can just passport back and forth into New York and whatnot. But that's you know.
Yeah.
But yeah. So that's, I know who I am now.
Yeah. So how do you, what's the word? Is it the word self-identify? How do you self-identify now?
I self-identify as Michelle. And I self-identify that I am an adoptee, and I'm a strong person, and you know, I'm just Michelle.
Yeah.
You know, I don't find, you know, I know every adoptee has a story, and I'm not any more unique than the next person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Before we hit the record button, we were talking about some things about the kind of like Native American and other indigenous cultures that are different.
mm-hmm.
So how would you sum those up? How would you see those differences between
nations?
between the Native American culture, way of life, and a New England way of life?
Oh.
And taken on things like identity and things.
How would that?
How would you see because people talk about, you know, their roots as being part of their identity, and there's a cultural mismatch between Native
so
American.
With me,
yeah,
from my adoption, my roots were pretty much taken from me. I had to relearn, or not relearn, but I had to learn about the culture, about a beautiful culture, about how tight the community is, how families are just knitted together. And I wanted that. So I missed out on a lot of that, but I was able to get it back in pieces. I had these foster parents, Jeff and Elaine, wonderful people, and they're living their life out in Arizona. But they took in, here in Connecticut, they were taking in Native American children as foster kids. And what they did, they also co-founded. Now, these people are also from England, Rushden, as a matter of fact. And they were co-founders of the Connecticut River Powwow Society. And as I was going through foster care, the social workers were like, Michelle needs this, take her to these events. And boy, did I learn a lot. I learned how to dance around the drum. I learned how sometimes they cook over the fire. I learned about Native music. I've met a lot of very well-known natives. It was a beautiful time during my foster years, and then I kept up that relationship with my foster parents as well, even after I got married. And so the culture is very much different than living in white society, so to speak, in New England. But I've gotten a lot of that back. I don't have everything back, but I have a lot of that back.
Yeah. So the kind of family values and the tighter community were the the big things that you mentioned.
The big things.
Ago, yeah.
Because I didn't have that here. When I was raised, when my adoptive mother was raising me, she didn't really, unless it was the holidays, she didn't really communicate with many people in our family. So I really, I don't even communicate with my adoptive family now because we really don't have much to say. And they're, I feel like an oddball. I always felt like an oddball in the adoptive family. In my birth family, I don't feel like the oddball. I was taken back with open arms. Seriously, my birth mother was just so thrilled to have me back in her life. She never wanted to give me up. And it was my grandmother who forced her to, because feasibly and financially, it wasn't in the cards.
Yeah.
My grandmother was raising my brother, so she couldn't take care of me. Had she known what was going on in Connecticut at the time that I went up to meet everybody, I don't think she would have sent me back. She would have kept me right there. But in some ways I was missing Connecticut.
Yeah.
Because of that's the way I was raised. And I and today I go back every once in a while to go visit the family.
So how old were you when you found out that your birth mother wanted to raise you and would have raised you if circumstances be different?
Oh, I was 15.
15.
I was 15. Yeah. When that first night I went to go visit in Canada, my birth mother just started crying. She says, I never wanted to give you up, and again, my grandmother made her give me up because she couldn't afford to, raise me too. Sharon would say, I never wanted to give you up. But I had no choice and I didn't know what to do. And her hospital roommate at the time when I was born knew my adoptive father and called him and knew he was looking for another child to raise. And once he found out I was available, he came right up the next day and adopted me and had me put on the membership rolls on the reservation as his daughter. There's another story. But he adopted me, and had he lived, I don't believe my adoptive mother would have ever touched me the way she did. She would have never raised me the way she did. He would have never allowed a lot of what happened. Never.
Yeah.
I was daddy's girl.
Yeah.
I was. So I honor him.
Was that, I mean, it's incredible that you did this at 15, right? So very determined young lady.
Oh, I was headstrong.
Headstrong. Was that the most pivotal moment for you? That discovery from
that changed my life. It changed my life. And honestly, I'm grateful for the moment that it changed my life, because even though I went through a lot of bad stuff before and some bad stuff after that, it totally changed my life. I was out of my adoptive mother's house and I saw the world. I saw the real world basically. And if I hadn't gotten out of that house, I don't know what would have happened. I doubt I would have my family today. I doubt, my life would have gone the way it is now. And so, yes, I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for my aunt telling me I was adopted, because I would have never known. So very pivotal, very, very pivotal moment.
Yeah.
So you have to take the bad with the good.
Yeah. Do any other pivotal moments come to mind?
The second she told me the story that I was adopted, that just blew me away. It's about to have a few tears here. Yeah. It was very, very emotional, and I was sorry that she was the one that told me. I wish my adoptive mother had told me, but she would have never told me. And then after that, learning more pivotal moments, learning I had 5 siblings over the years that I never knew existed. 5 siblings that I was sad not to grow up with. My adoptive father had two other children, one adopted, one biological, but he had divorced his wife at the time. So I never knew about Denise and David. And then I had my brother with my birth mother, and my biological father has two other daughters. Another pivotal moment, meeting my biological father at the age of 30, I learned I had two sisters, one of whom I met during that time. And then after that, the two girls wanted nothing to do with me. It's sad. A lot of adoptees do get that once they meet other siblings. Then all of a sudden, there's just, there's no communication. My biological father's wife did not know about me until I actually met him. And he said, I have to tell my wife. I have to tell my wife. I said, I'm 30 years old. There's nothing I need. I have a family. I'm good. I just wanted to see the man. I wanted to put a face to the man who helped create me. And I did that. But he says, I've got to tell my wife. I've got to tell my wife. Okay, do what you need to do. He asked me to write her a letter, to which I showed him, and he said he loved it. I sent it to her. She calls me and accused me of wanting to destroy a family. I want money. What do you think he's going to do? Be a father to you? Be a grandfather to your son? And I said to her, I said, he's a grown man. He can make his own decision. I also told him he didn't need to tell you if he didn't want to. It was okay. I was actually okay with that. She just totally made me out to be a monster. And so did he. He lied in so many ways. He said I forced him to meet me. Never did I. No. Never did I force him to meet me. So
but it doesn't sound like you took that personally, though, somehow.
Oh, in the beginning I did. I was very hurt by what he did. You knew I was born. You saw pictures of me as a newborn in 1969. And then you don't meet me until 30 years later, and then you make me out to be a monster to your family. That just, I did take it personally at that point. Over the years, I've learned, no, it's okay. I'm okay with it. I don't take anything personally anymore.
No.
And you can't, I dwelled on it for a while. And yes, I went back into the fog after I was accused of such horrible things. But then I came out of it, and how I came out of it, again, conscious breathing and just pure tenacity, I guess, if that's the right word for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. What is the right word?
Strength, resilience.
Did we mention? Did we mention Don Miguel Ruiz? Did I mention Don Miguel Ruiz to you last week? Have you heard of this guy? So he's he's a Toltec shaman, I think. That's So it's another indigenous culture, but he's got he's got a book out called he's got loads of books, and his son is now working with him as well, I think. But the first book that I read was called The Voice of Knowledge.
Okay.
And it's a very powerful book about who we are before we are conditioned by the world.
Oh, yeah. Wow! I must get this book.
Yeah, and there's a few different books. The Voice of Knowledge, but there's another one. But the reason I mentioned his name is because he has this. I think it's a follow-up book to Voice of Knowledge. It's something like the four commandments, or the four principles, or the four. I can't remember which one it is, but one of them is take nothing personally. Take nothing.
Yeah.
Personally.
No.
No. And I'm just thinking, the question going through my mind is, what was it that occurred to you when you were getting this abuse and being called these names and being accused of stuff that you weren't that you weren't.
What went through my mind?
Yeah, what was going?
One word. One word. Why? That was what was going through my mind. My mind was going, why? Why are you doing this to me? That was how I was taking it personally. You know, it was like, why after all these years, 30 years, and all of a sudden, you know, I seem to be this outcast in your life, or, you know, I'm a mistake in your life, you know.
What question? Sorry, what answers did you come up with to that why question?
So as I thought about it, as time went on, it was my biological. Are we still talking about my biological father? He was just.
Yes, we're talking about your biological father and
He was scared. I think he was scared because he was already committed to another woman. And when he found out that Sharon was pregnant, he basically took off. He learned later on that I had been born, and he went to go see Sharon, and she showed him a picture of me as a newborn in the hospital, you know, little hospital cradle or whatever. And he went into another room, and he didn't come out for quite the while, I guess. And he came out and he looked very pale and sullen, like he had been crying. And then he took off, and he never saw Sharon again until we found out where he was, and I made contact with him. And you know, when I made contact with him, he had told me, he says, I've been waiting for this call for a long time. So he acknowledged me for sure, absolutely acknowledged me. And I said, you know, I'd love to meet you. I'd like to see your face. And, you know, and it just went from there. And we met actually at my biological mother's house. And what a meeting it was. And there's pictures in my book too. But after that, I can't tell you why he became as nasty as he did. I don't know why. And I'm okay with it now. But yeah, of course, I took it personally back then. But today, I can't dwell on those things, because then I can't get through my daily life either. You know, you just can't. You keep dwelling, you're not going to do well. You have to just let it go. You have to forgive them for yourself. That's what I do. I practice a lot of forgiveness.
Yeah. You use the word scared, and that was the word, that was the emotion going through my head as well as I asked you the question. And you took us back to you know, when he took off, when he didn't want anything to do with your birth month, and he was scared then, and I also think he was scared when you got
no
back
doubt
in touch, yeah. And and I'm wondering what do you think was going through his wife's head as well? Was that and heart, was that fear as well, do you think, or something else? Or
I think it was, very much so. I believe she was she had a lot of fear too, because I think again, I was blatantly accused on the phone by her that I was coming to destroy a family. No, I wasn't. You know, if anything, maybe you'd like to have an addition to your family, if you'd like, you know, a friendship. I mean, I wasn't looking for anything. I didn't need to be raised. I didn't, you know, I was already married, had a son, making my own way in life, but was just grateful that I put a face to the man that helped make me, you know, because I needed that. I looked for that man for 15 years, and come to find out, he lived in the next town over for all those years.
The thing that came to mind as you were just, you know, you said coming to destroy her family.
Yeah.
The metaphor that flipped into my head, or the picture that came up to my mind, was circling the wagons, right? So she went on the attack to you.
She went, yeah.
And I'm wondering, have you come across this idea of generational trauma. Yeah, can you come across that?
In different ways, yes. Generational trauma, absolutely. As into what terms, though?
Okay, so when I heard about this term a while ago, a couple of months ago or something, and the example that was given was the Jews who the Jewish people who have been persecuted and
oh yes,
yeah.
Okay.
And the fact that this gets passed down, and think about the millions of Jews that died in Hitler's concentration camps. But I was also thinking about a series that I saw earlier this year called The English, which was about it was about the destruction of the Native Americans. It was about the
annihilation.
Yeah. And what came to my mind is that, you know, you were coming to destroy her family. That's how she saw it. And
I think so.
And as on the back of generational trauma, you know, on the back of the Native Americans being persecuted by the white settlers, and that's what was playing for her. And
so I'm, you know, of course I can't speak for her really, but she was just feeling that threat. And mind you, she was not Native American, and neither was my birth father. So my adopted father was Native American. But I don't know what she was feeling. I don't know what kind of trauma she was feeling, but she was definitely threatened. Yeah. You know, and the generational trauma that I felt being born in 1969, and I'm going to go on a different topic here real quick. If I had not been adopted the way I was, and I'm kind of grateful I was adopted the way I was, because it was the baby scoop era in Canada. They were scooping up Native babies, bringing them to residential schools or Catholic orphanages. If I hadn't been adopted the way I was, would I have gone to one of those schools and one of those or one of those orphanages? I don't know. You know, I know, but I do believe that may have happened. In our area outside of Montreal, they didn't want that type of publicity, so the baby scoop era stopped in the early 60s. But I'm just, you know, again, I wonder what would have happened, because my birth mother had no idea how she was going to give me up until her hospital roommate intervened. So in that way, I'm lucky I was adopted the way I was, and in 90% of the rest of it, not so lucky. But you know, here I am. But there's just so much food for thought as far as, you know, trauma.
I think it's in the English, or maybe it's another thing I watched on television. I saw part of the film involved showed that Catholic orphanages, Catholic orphanages with the Native American girls, and how they were treated, how the nuns treated them. And it was absolutely shocking.
I went to Catholic school, and it was that's another book.
That's another book.
That's another book. Oh my goodness. I remember a nun coming up to me, and this was before I officially found out I was adopted. I guess some people knew I was adopted, but I never believed them. They were like, oh, you're adopted, you're adopted. Or some kids on the school bus saying I was adopted. I just never believed them because my adoptive mother said, no, you're not adopted at all. She would deny it completely. But anyway, I had a nun corner me in a coat closet, and she looked at me. You're not God's child, you're adopted. Well, of course, my adoptive mother really got mad about that, but she never did anything about it. It was so funny. She never made a call to the school or anything, but she was vehement saying, you're not adopted. That nun lied to you. And I'm like, wow, I'll never forget that corner. Another pivotal moment. I'll never forget that moment.
Yeah.
Where she cornered me. I'm like, wow, okay.
So,
But, and it's funny, I can laugh about some of those moments where normally, someone might cry, but you have to laugh at it,
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about that last week, actually, I think. Laughing at our trauma.
Laughing at the trauma. You have to laugh at it. Because you know what? It's a moment and it will pass. And you go on to the next thing. And yes, you're going to experience a lot of things in your life and you just move on. I just take it with deep breath. Yeah, I might think about it for a while, but then I just, I have so many other things I can work on.
Yeah.
Within myself.
So when I mentioned this Don Miguel Ruiz book and that true self, the self before the voice of knowledge, the self before we are conditioned by the world that we grow up in. And there was a little, I felt a little jolt within you to that. I don't know what it was, your eyes. So what was that? What was the jolt? Do you know?
Just a jolt, I guess.
Yeah.
Just a jolt.
Yeah.
About the nun telling me I'm not God's child. I'm not, that put a spark in me. Yeah, it did, because I kind of looked at her, and within my mind, I'm like, I'm everybody's child, and it does make me laugh today because it was a different belief back then, and we all just have to forge our way. And that was my jolt.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. What do you mean? What belief? Like belief within you, or belief within the culture? What belief?
Belief within me. Belief within me. The unique way of thinking about how things are said, and how you deal with it. And my belief is, if it doesn't resonate with me, then, I'm not going to be thinking about that for a long time, and I don't even think I gave it a thought as to what the nun said to me for more than a day. And that I was really young back then too. That was 3rd grade. So, but I'll never forget it, ever. Still makes me laugh.
Yeah.
So
it's incredible, because we're the ability, this conditioning thing, this process that happens to us, is kind of like it's dependent on us not being able to judge what's true and what's false. Whereas you seem to have had inherent some sort of ability to do that.
I don't judge anybody. I hold no judgments up, even against the nun. There was no judgment there. That was her thought. That was okay. That I think that's a gift I might have, to just look past it. I just look past it, and I look towards the future. I look towards tomorrow, and I just grow with it. I move on. I grow with it. Okay. And then also you learn to be wary of what some people might say, or just, be careful, because they might say something else another time. I couldn't even give you an example, but if anybody wants to say something unkind or judgmental, I'll just have a good day. That's just me. I I don't fight back. I don't argue. I just take it as it comes, because that's the way I grew up. I had to take things as they came because there was no remedy for all the hurt I had. For all the physical abuse I suffered, there was no remedy for that. I just had to take it. And until I didn't anymore, until I was saved one night by a police officer. And then that's where things started getting a whole lot better. I didn't see it back then because I was an angry teenager.
So can you tell us that story? The story about...
I can give you that story, yes, about the police officer, sure. Yeah. So I had just come back from a summer of being in Canada, meeting my birth family, having a great time, emotional time. And I came back to a woman who was so angry that I met my birth family, that I went to Kahnawake, and met my, I think my adoptive mother was afraid I was going to see or meet my adoptive father's family, which I never did. I never saw them. My coming back the day before school was supposed to start, that night was horrible. She wanted me out of the house. I was no longer her responsibility, because there was no legal adoption. There was nothing written on paper about me. So, she wanted to treat me as if I didn't belong to her at all. But I begged not to go because I had missed Connecticut. And believe it or not, I actually kind of missed her. So I come back and I begged. I was crying. I even made up a little lie, saying, no, you can't kick me out right now. And so we went to what was called family therapy the next day. And, we talked about it. And then she was like, oh, all right, she can stay. But I have to do everything she says. I was not allowed to talk back. I was not allowed to talk about anything. And it was on the premise I was never to talk about my trip to Canada. Great. Okay. So I had to withhold in all my emotions, all the memories that I had that summer. I couldn't talk about it. I wasn't allowed to in that house. Still, nothing had changed. She put all kinds of stuff in the room that I was sleeping in. I never had I had a bedroom, but it was all of her stuff. And I only had a cot that I slept on in front of a dresser all of those years. She never really gave me much in the way of a room or even a normal childhood, so to speak. So 2 months go by. It was a very tense 2 months. All of a sudden, she picked a fight and she came after me with a cigarette, a belt, and threw something at me and went out of the house to call the police to say that I was starting a fight with her. Never happened. She actually punched me in the nose, and worse. So the police come. They tried to talk her out of, kicking me out of the house, these things with families. They calmed down after a couple of days, blah, blah, blah. Well, she says, if you don't get her out of here, I'm going to murder her tonight. She really was serious. She was going to kill me that night. Police officer, again, tried to calm her down, saying, if you just talk about it, if you just give it a few days, things will calm down. Then he realized she was serious. So the officer said, Michelle, why don't you go get a few things? She didn't want me back in the house. He told her, Michelle has the right to go back into the house to get some of her stuff. I will take her to the station. He took me to the station and he saved my life that night. And I was brought to not great shelter in the city. Learned a few things there. Don't ever go back to a shelter. And that was kind of a moment where I realized I'm going to forge my way into this life, and I know I'm going to have some bad moments. But there's plenty more good out there that I can, move on to. Wow. So after that, it was foster homes until I aged out, and then I met my husband. And we've been together 32 years.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned your book a couple of times. Obviously, listeners, as always, there's links to Michelle's social and details on the book, website and stuff in the links below this episode. So you don't have to try and scribble anything down when you're driving or ironing. I normally listen to podcasts when I'm ironing, driving, or walking the dog. I never have a pen with me, right? So is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners, Michelle?
Oh, Yeah. Take the good with the bad when you're going through your thoughts about an adoption or your life. Forge through, be kind, and there are more good moments than there are bad. There really are. There really are. And, you know, I still go through it. You know, I don't think anyone else is more unique than the other.
Cool. And last question.
Yes.
You're a writer, so I'm putting you on the spot here, really. Does a title for this episode, for this interview in the podcast, does a title come to your mind?
Does a title?
Yeah.
Who am I? Who am I?
Okay.
Yeah, that's the title. That's the title of my book. That's the title of my life. Who am I?
Okay. Cool. That's what we'll cover. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, Michelle. It's been lovely.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.
Cool.
Thank you, listeners. We'll speak to you again very soon. Take care.